You're listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 406.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. How's everybody doing today? Hope you are all doing well. I'm having a lovely Tuesday morning here in my cookbook bunker. I've been out to the dentist, came home, ate a little bit of breakfast, and now I'm settling in to talk to you about an exciting weekend that just took place in the culinary world with the James Beard Foundation Awards. It's funny, on Cookbook Love Podcast, I don't think I've talked about these awards before, but I'm talking to you about them today because I want you to be aware of them and also to share some authors with you who you have heard here on the show. So if you follow the food world, maybe even if you don't, this was an exciting weekend with the James Beard Foundation Awards. These are often called the Oscars of the food world. They represent one of the highest honors a cookbook author, chef, restaurateur, or food writer can receive. James Beard was an American chef, teacher, and author, famously appointed the Dean of American Cookery by the New York Times. He lived until 1985, and he was a prominent foodie and pioneered culinary arts by becoming the first chef to demonstrate cooking on network television in 1946. So that even predated Julia Child being on television. Some of his notable achievements was, of course, his NBC show called I Love to Eat, his advocacy for fresh local American ingredients and classic regional traditions in the U.S. over European cuisine. He wrote more than 20 classic cookbooks, and he was an influential educator, mentored generations of professional chefs and food enthusiasts at his renowned James Beard Cooking School in New York City, which opened in 1955. Today, his legacy lives through the James Beard Foundation, which is headquartered in his former Greenwich Village townhouse in New York City, and the foundation hosts the awards, the James Beard Awards. So these took place, and the awards receive a lot of attention from mainstream media, but in the culinary space, it's one set of awards. There's also awards for the International Association of Culinary Professionals, the Art of Eating Prize, and the Gourmand World Cookbook Awards. So whenever this award season rolls around, people in the food world get excited, kind of like people in film or screenwriting get excited about the Oscars. But I find myself thinking a lot about the question that matters to all of us who love cookbooks, and thinking a little bit deeper about the books that won. What made them award-worthy? Was it the recipes? Was it the photography? Was it the writing? Was it the platform? Was it the publisher? And of course, it's all those things, but it's even more than that. The books that rise to the top of these awards, as you're going to hear today, about 3 examples that I'm going to give you, are more than just a collection of recipes. They are a unique perspective presented by an author. They often preserve a culture. They are educational, inspirational, and they help people who read the book or use the book see food and sometimes see themselves in a whole new way. So before we celebrate the award winners, I want to take a minute to talk about how these awards are actually given. Most people think the judges just flip through the books and select maybe the one that looks the best or the most famous author. But it is much more rigorous than that. They actually create panels of culinary professionals, recipe developers, editors, journalists, and chefs who spend months reviewing the submissions for the award. They evaluate the writing, look at the way the book is organized, look at the culturally that the book would make, look at its originality, and the usability of the book. And then they often take the book into the kitchen and they cook from it. In their kitchen, they physically prepare recipes. They test whether or not instructions are clear, if the recipes are accurate, and if the recipes deliver on the promise that is made on the page. This often happens sometimes too when we propose cookbooks to publishers. If we include sample chapters, I have heard cases where editors will actually take the proposal into the kitchen and cook from the proposal. So every recipe that's in a sample chapter or sample writing for a proposal need to be ready to be tested, fully fleshed out, written in your style, your own work, your own words, and a very good representation of the types of recipes that are going to be in your book. So once the awards are given at the James Beard Foundation, a lot of things can happen to a cookbook as a result of that. Sometimes people see a bump in their sales. Media opportunities are often sought out. Sometimes even books are seen as more desirable. They maybe are translated into another language, or they're discovered by a whole new group of people. And I also think that this means something else also, and that these books have contributed to the culinary conversation here in the U.S. They help preserve stories, traditions, and ideas that deserve to endure. It's not uncommon that award-winning cookbooks are often part of a serious culinary library. They become part of a permanent culinary collection. So if you collect cookbooks, buying the James Beard award-winning books is like picking the best of the best from the past year. So personal libraries, libraries and culinary schools, public libraries, restaurant kitchens, family collections, long after the bestseller lists go, bestsellers are not the same thing as award winners. Many of these books remain on the shelf and continue to be books that teach and inspire for years to come. So the momentum from the weekend hasn't really slowed down in my eyes. Just yesterday morning, I opened my inbox to find a pitch from a publicist who wanted me to bring yet another of this year's newly minted James Beard Award winners onto the podcast. So I'm excited to bring you that soon. This community does move fast, and I can't wait for you to hear from her. And it will be an interview that takes place after the award has been given. So that'll be fun to talk about. But let's talk a little bit about 3 specific authors that we have had the privilege of having as a guest here on Cookbook Love Podcast. I've had the privilege of spending time with them during the interview, excuse me, and the privilege of communicating with them in my inbox, my email inbox. And you can tell a lot about a person by the types of emails they write and if they actually write them themselves. And I'm not at all surprised that these 3 authors personally wrote back and forth to me. Now, the conversation could have been headed off by their PR agent, which in a couple of cases was Carrie Bachman, who I will link to here in the show notes as well, because she has introduced me to many really great cookbook authors, and her episode talks all about public relations for a cookbook. So thank you to Carrie for bringing them my way. And then also one of the writers was a mastermind student of mine back in, I think it was 7 or 8 years ago. And she talks about that in her interview. And she mentions in the interview, I'll talk about that when I get to her. But anyway, we're going to talk about these 3 authors and what a privilege it's been to have had the time to talk to them and to spend time with them here on the show. Okay, so the first is Sapna Punjabi. This was episode 347, and her book is called Dal Chawal. And in episode 347, We talked a lot about the discovery of your authentic voice. And we talked about Indian comfort food that she presented in her book, Dal Chawal. So Sapna is a lifelong vegetarian, Ayurvedic practitioner, and registered dietitian nutritionist. In this book, Dal Chawal, Sapna wrote about Indian comfort food, home-style Indian food, which is different than restaurant style, at its finest. It's economical, it's healthy, it's delicious. She wrote 85 recipes that form the foundation of Indian cooking. And in our interview, we talked all about her journey to writing Dal Chawal. And Sapna was the author that was a mastermind student of mine 7 years ago. And I went back and listened to the interview, and Sapna said that she can just remember when she joined the mastermind, she felt so impatient. When I said that writing a traditionally published cookbook is a little bit of a long game, it may be 2 to 3 years until the book is actually published. She said she just felt very impatient. She wanted the book like right away. And that's not uncommon. People, when they get this idea and they get the motivation to start a project, it's just like anything else. We're so motivated initially that we want the results of what we're doing to show up fast. And it happens for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they are reasons based in reality, and sometimes there's reasons based in maybe being afraid that someone else might get to the topic before we do, or that we're going to lose our motivation or our mojo. But anyway, she just said she remembered feeling so impatient. And also, she thought 3 years felt like a really long time. And she thinks that she had 3 different concepts that she had in her mind when she came to the mastermind. And that's one of the things I do with people is when we are home cooks, expert cooks, culinary professionals, dietitians, chefs, we know so much about food and nutrition, you guys. And it's often hard to narrow down the concept for our first book and pick one concept. And Sapna admitted that she had 3. So she said that this mastermind might have been the first place that formally heard her ideas for her books, like said out loud. And then she went on to write the proposal for Dal Chawal. She retained an agent who's Sally Eckes, and Sally went on to shop the proposal to the publishers, and she got a contract with Hardy Grant, and then Hardy Grant ended up publishing the book. So this book was really rooted in Sapna's identity, who she was. She came to the U.S. as a master's degree student. She lived in Dallas, Texas, and she missed the home-style cooking from India. And her meals, when she ate at the clinic and when she ate in the hospital where she ultimately worked, always invoked a lot of curiosity from the people who were in the lunchroom with her. So she was always kind of explaining the type of food she was eating and talking about wellness. Then she talks about in the interview her routines and her habits that helped her write her book. And she shares a lot of really great tips for first-time cookbook writers. So it was a joy to reconnect with Sapna in episode 347. And it was exciting that her book was nominated for the James Beard Award. Okay, the next book was from episode 348. And the book is called Umma, A Korean Mom's Kitchen Wisdom with Sarah On and Nam Soon On. Sarah is the daughter, Nam Soon is the mother, and Sarah appeared on the show at episode 348. During that show, I talked a little bit about Sarah, who's a digital storyteller, creator of Honest Kitchen, where she shares and documents her mother, Nam Soon On's recipes. In her book, Sarah and Nam Soon took a deep dive into Korean home cooking. And by deep, I mean there is a lot to read in this book. So if you love to read cookbooks and you're interested in learning about Korean food, this is an excellent book to add to your collection. And they also added not only the deep dive, but decades of wisdom and techniques that can help anyone cook like a Korean Umma. Sarah On said that her mother's cooking processes and the processes that she went through just to make something like, let's just say something like kimchi, just really embodied the love that Namsoon had for her family. So we talked all about building her presence online with Honest Kitchen. So if you're interested in learning how to do that, she had some great tips. We talked about the journey with her mother, writing the book. And that is always a journey. I remember a couple of episodes I've had with mother-child cookbook writing teams. And it's fascinating how that happens, that the book actually gets finished, because often the mother and the daughter, or the mother and the son, have very different styles when it comes to the way they write, the way they teach, what they want to talk about, how the book is actually unfolding, how it's directed, how it's getting published. And it's a journey, and it's a dance that the mother and the child have to do together to write these books. So she talks about that, and then she talks about helpful tips for building a pantry. 3 key flavors that is focused in Korean cooking, which she called sweet, salty, and tang. And the recipes that she thinks that people should start with when they're using the book. And then the last part of the conversation, and something that we kind of threaded through the whole thing, which I absolutely loved, and I think probably because I'm a mother myself, is a mother's love and wisdom, and how far a mother will go for their own children. If you're a mother, you understand what that means. There is just something born and bred into us when we become mothers, that we will almost go to the lengths of the earth for our kids. And to feed them is so primal and so instinctive. And sharing food with them really, I think in a unspoken way, allows us to be the women that we are created to be. And it's not rooted in career. It's not rooted in recognition. It's not rooted in anything related to women's liberation. It is a primal thing. And I absolutely adored talking to Sarah about that, because she was looking at it from a daughter's perspective. But she had the maturity and the wisdom to look back and to see that she just knew that her mother was willing to go to the ends of the earth also for her and for her father, who worked a blue-collar job as a painter. She talks about this in the episode. And he would leave in the dark. He'd leave early in the morning and work for 12 hours. He painted houses. Maybe he still does paint. I'm not sure if he's retired, but he's a painter. And his wife, Namsoon, packed a lunch for him every day. And I say, when you're married too, sometimes how far your love is willing to go for another person. It's truly self-sacrificial in a lot of ways. And this is just book and this conversation, and the way I felt about it and the way you might feel when you read the book was just dripping with this whole sentiment of cooking being a sign of love and determination and commitment for a family. So it's a beautiful book, and congratulations to Sarah On for her award. And that's episode 348. Okay, so the third book and the third interview that I've had with a James Beard Award nominee was episode 391, Baking and the Meaning of Life, a conversation with Helen Go. It was great to talk to Helen in our episode. She's the author of the book, Baking and the Meaning of Life, How to Find Joy in 100 Recipes. She was widely known prior to writing this book for her work as a recipe developer with Yotam Ottolenghi, co-authoring the New York Times bestselling books Sweet and Comfort. So we talked about those books, but we also talked about her as a debut solo cookbook author, and for her, the deeper meaning behind baking. Helen brought a very unique perspective to the kitchen because, in addition to her baking work, she maintains a psychotherapy practice. So her book blends those two worlds, sharing not only her recipe, but her unique perspective as a psychotherapist and her reflections on why baking matters and how it can bring joy and meaning to everyday life. I loved this so much because bringing joy and meaning to everyday life can come from so many things that we choose to do. And for her, she's talking about baking, but to take that to a larger level, cooking can do the same thing. Feeding a family can be the same thing. Enjoying preparing food, the same thing. Tons of joy and tons of meaning to everyday life. We're not talking about restaurant kitchen life here. We're not talking about the life of an award-winning cookbook author. We're talking about everyday life. So in the book, what Helen does is she draws on her upbringing from Malaysia and Australia, bringing and weaving in flavors and foods from those two places. She talks about her years of developing recipes with Otto Lengi. And I think one thing that happens with recipe development is you just get good at it. It's a practice. And you get to, you start to develop a mind where you're always kind of like developing flavor combinations. You're thinking about the way things go together. You're maybe mashing up two recipes and making them your own. So she's had a lot of experience doing that. So she had a lot of fun doing this for her own book. And she shares in her book both sweet and savory baking recipes. So it's not all sweet. I think sometimes we think of baking, we're always thinking sweet, but there are savory things in there that would be salty or more vegetal. And she celebrates creativity, connection, and nourishment. She also says baking is about joy and connection more than survival. I think that's kind of fascinating because when you think of cooking food, like feeding a family, this is the way I always felt. There was joy and connection from us eating together, but I was preparing food for our human survival to provide nutrition, calories, protein, things that we needed for the energy for our everyday life. But baking takes it above that, joy and connection. And we really looked a deep dive into the table of contents for this book. And Helen does provide some tips and techniques in baking insights from her years working in a professional. So those are the three books, Sapna Punjabi, Dal Chawal, Sarah On with Umma, and Helen Go with Baking and the Meaning of Life. So I will link to all of those episodes below in the show notes because if you're interested in listening to the shows, you can link back to them. And also, I highly encourage you to consider adding one of these three or all three of these books to your culinary recipe collection. They're not only now published, like I said, so different from a bestseller, but truly something that has been judged an award-winning book or a nominee by the James Beard Award. These books are very strong cookbook concepts. They're not just recipes, but these authors have a lot of experience, expertise. They also were very curious, and they had a very strong point of view. So when you're able to combine those things with what you know, what you've lived, what you care about, and what you want to share with others, you can come up with an award-winning book concept. I think these awards are wonderful. They bring a lot of recognition and visibility to the cookbook space. But every award-winning cookbook starts the same way, with someone who has an idea and a message to share and recipes that they're working on, and an author who is very willing to do the work. And like Sapna said, it takes time. It's not always a short game, but a very rewarding process to be traditionally published by some of the best traditional publishers in the industry. We had Hardy Grant represented, America's Test Kitchen did Sarah On's Kitchen, and Abrams Books was the publisher for Helen's book on baking. So that is it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast, all about the James Beard Cookbook Award winners who have been on the show. Stay tuned, or James Beard Award nominees or winners that have been on the show. Stay tuned for an upcoming episode where I will talk to another James Beard Award winner. And I'll also link to the show with Carrie Bachman, the PR agent who has represented many of these authors, and she shares her tips about public relations for cookbooks. This is your host, Maggie Green, and until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.